Sometimes, money can buy the world's best doctors, the most advanced machines, and the rarest treatments, but it cannot buy a second chance at life. Our story begins with a billionaire, a man whose wealth touched every corner of his life, yet whose body began to fail in ways no specialist could explain. 20 doctors stood helpless in front of him, their medical brilliance shattered by something so simple, something they all missed. And in the end, it wasn't a surgeon, a specialist, or a professor who unlocked the truth. It was the quiet, overlooked black security guard, the one man no one expected to notice what the billionaires and the doctors could not see. Stay with me until the end of this story, because you will not believe the lesson hidden behind what happened. If you are new here, welcome to our channel. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss powerful stories like this one. Richard Langston was not just wealthy, he was untouchable. At 62 years old, he had built an empire of steel and oil, a global business that stretched across continents. Private jets, mansions in 3 countries, and a board of directors who bowed at his every word. To the outside world, Richard was unstoppable. But inside his body, something was breaking down. It started quietly: shortness of breath during his morning walks, fatigue after meetings, dizzy spells he dismissed as stress. When his personal physician noticed the billionaire's lips turning slightly blue during a gala dinner, Richard laughed it off. "Don't worry, document. I'm just getting old," he said, waving a glass of wine. But Richard wasn't just getting old. He was deteriorating. Soon, his mornings began with splitting headaches, his hands trembled while signing contracts, and his once powerful speeches during board meetings became slurred. His staff grew worried, and even his closest executives whispered about his sudden weakness. Doctors were flown in, one after another. Cardiologists from Switzerland, neurologists from Germany, specialists from New York. Richard spared no expense. His hospital suite was more like a luxury palace, filled with machines, nurses, and top professionals who assured his family they would find the answer. But each test came back clean. His heart was strong, his brain scans showed nothing unusual, his blood work revealed no clear explanation. And yet, Richard Langston was dying. By the time the 20th doctor shook his head in defeat, Richard's once proud face carried the hollow look of a man betrayed by his own body. Still, no one had the courage to admit what they were truly thinking. If the greatest doctors on earth couldn't help him, Richard Langston's days were numbered. But fate had other plans. And the one who would uncover the truth wasn't wearing a white coat. It was David Okoro, the quiet Nigerian security guard assigned to watch over the billionaire's hospital suite, an ordinary man whose sharp eyes and humble instincts would see what 20 doctors missed. David Okoro had worked security for nearly a decade. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and quiet, the kind of man people overlooked in fancy halls and luxury hospitals. His job was simple: guard the doors, keep watch, and never interfere. But David was not a man who ignored what he saw. Born in a small Nigerian village, he grew up watching his mother treat fevers, snake bites, and strange illnesses with local herbs when no doctor was available. She had always told him, "A healer must see with more than the eyes. He must notice what others ignore." Those words stayed with David, even now, standing outside the billionaire's hospital suite. From his post, David had watched Richard Langston's decline more closely than anyone. Unlike the doctors, David was there every hour of the day, observing the billionaire's moods, his habits, his struggles. And something didn't sit right. He noticed that Richard seemed worse in the evenings, especially after dinner. His hands would shake more, his breathing would grow shallow, and his eyes turned a strange yellow tint. In the mornings, however, the billionaire often looked stronger, even cracking jokes with the nurses. David also noticed little things the medical staff ignored. The untouched tray of fruit Richard's daughter brought him. The billionaire's refusal to drink from certain bottles of water. The faint smell of something metallic in the room whenever meals were delivered. One night, after another team of doctors left shaking their heads, David quietly muttered to himself, "This is not sickness. Something else is wrong." He couldn't prove it yet, but his instincts screamed that the billionaire wasn't just ill, he was being poisoned. And while 20 doctors searched for answers in charts and machines, David's eyes were fixed on something far simpler: the food, the drinks, the very environment around the billionaire. That night, as Richard drifted into another restless sleep, David made a silent vow. He would watch more closely. He would look where no one else dared. Because sometimes, survival didn't come from brilliance, it came from noticing the obvious. It was just past 7 p.m. when the hospital corridor grew quiet. Nurses shifted their rounds, and most visitors had gone home. For Richard Langston, dinner was always delivered precisely at this hour. A silver tray rolled in by a catering staff hired exclusively for the billionaire. David leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching as the meal arrived. Tonight it was soup, a slice of bread, and a glass of fresh orange juice. Nothing unusual, at least to the doctors. But David noticed something. The server placed the tray on the table, bowed slightly, and left too quickly. No conversation, no check to see if the billionaire needed anything. Just in and out. Minutes later, Richard's daughter, Claire, entered the room. She kissed her father on the forehead and urged him to eat. Richard, weak and compliant, picked up the spoon and began sipping the soup. David's eyes narrowed. Within 20 minutes, he saw the change. Richard's breathing grew shallow, his skin turned pale, and sweat dripped from his forehead. By the time the nurse rushed in to check his vitals, alarms blaring from the machines, David already knew. Whatever was harming Richard was coming from his food. He remembered what his mother used to say back in the village. If the sickness appears after the meal, then the cure is not in the medicine, it is in what he eats. The doctors scrambled again, ordering more scans, more tests, more blood work. But none of them noticed what David had. Later that night, as the chaos settled and the billionaire slept under sedation, David quietly slipped into the room. He stood near the untouched glass of orange juice, lifting it to his nose. There it was again, that faint metallic smell. He set the glass down, his mind racing. This wasn't illness. This was deliberate. Someone was poisoning the billionaire, drop by drop, right under the noses of the greatest doctors in the world. And David knew one thing for certain. If he didn't act soon, Richard Langston wouldn't survive another week. The next evening, the hospital moved with its usual rhythm. Doctors on their rounds, nurses changing shifts, Richard Langston's family whispering their fears in the hall. To anyone else, it was routine. But to David, every second mattered. He had a plan. When the silver tray arrived again, this time carrying roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and another glass of juice, David stood straighter, his sharp eyes fixed on the server. The man avoided eye contact again, rushing out almost nervously. As soon as the room was quiet, David stepped forward. He waited until Claire was distracted by a phone call before carefully lifting the plate. His heart pounded. He wasn't a doctor, he wasn't a detective, but he trusted his instincts. From his pocket, he pulled out a small trick he'd carried since childhood, a thin strip of dried palm leaf his mother once showed him could detect toxins in water. He dipped it quickly into the juice. Within seconds, The leaf curled and darkened. David's throat tightened. Poison! He set the glass down quickly, hiding the evidence before anyone noticed. His mind raced. Who would do this? And why? Later, when Richard was encouraged to eat, David quietly leaned closer to him and whispered, "Sir, don't drink the juice. Please." Richard blinked at him, confused. But for reasons even he couldn't explain, the weakened billionaire set the glass aside. That night, something strange happened. For the first time in weeks, Richard's symptoms did not worsen after dinner. He even managed a faint smile before drifting into sleep. David stood guard outside the door, his jaw tight. He now had proof that someone inside the hospital, maybe even within Richard's trusted circle, was feeding him poison. And yet, he knew he couldn't just speak up. Who would believe a security guard over 20 world-class doctors? So David made a decision. He would keep watching, keep testing, and gather undeniable proof. Because if he was right, then Richard Langston wasn't dying from disease at all. He was being murdered. The next morning, Richard Langston woke with more strength than usual. His color was better, his breathing steady. The doctors were puzzled but chalked it up to temporary improvement. But David knew the truth. It was because Richard had refused the poisoned drink the night before. Now, the question burned in his mind. Who was behind it? He replayed the details in his head. The catering staff came and went quickly. The nurses were attentive but overworked. Richard's family visited daily, his daughter Claire, his younger brother Martin, even a few close business associates. But one face stood out to David. Martin Langston. Martin was always there, hovering too close to the billionaire's bedside, watching everything with sharp, calculating eyes. Unlike Claire, who wept openly for her father, Martin showed little emotion. He asked the doctors endless questions about inheritance rights, about what would happen if Richard couldn't sign documents anymore. And then there was the way he insisted on being present during meal deliveries, often urging his brother to eat up and keep his strength. David's instincts flared. In his village back home, his mother always said, "When sickness comes from the table, the enemy is not far from the family." That evening, David decided to watch more closely. He stood near the doorway when the food was delivered, another tray with soup, bread, and water. Martin hovered close by, chatting loudly with Claire, but David's sharp eyes caught something subtle, a flick of Martin's hand near the glass of water before Richard reached for it. David's chest tightened. He couldn't prove it yet, but he was certain. The poison wasn't coming from strangers. It was coming from someone inside the billionaire's own bloodline. The truth was darker than anyone wanted to believe. And David knew that if he stayed silent much longer, Richard Langston would not only lose his fortune, he would lose his life. That night, the hospital suite was dimly lit, the steady beeping of machines echoing in the silence. Richard slept, his chest rising and falling with fragile rhythm. Claire had gone home to rest, but Martin lingered, pacing the room like a wolf guarding territory. David stood at his post, his eyes locked on the untouched tray of food. He couldn't stay quiet any longer. Slowly, he stepped into the room. "Mr. Martin," he said calmly, his deep voice breaking the silence. Martin turned, eyebrows raised. "What is it, guard? You're supposed to watch the door, not interrupt." David met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "I've noticed something," he said. "Every time your brother eats or drinks from these trays, his condition worsens. But last night, when he avoided the drink, he slept better." For a moment, Martin's face froze, then quickly softened into a smirk. "You're imagining things. Leave the medicine to the doctors." But David didn't back down. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I may not be a doctor, but I know poison when I see it. Where I come from, we don't need machines to recognize death creeping into food. And I see it here." The smirk faded. Martin's eyes hardened, his jaw tightening. He leaned in, his whisper sharp like a blade. "You're paid to guard the door, not to speak. If you value your job, and your life, you'll forget what you think you saw." David didn't flinch. His heart pounded, but he held his ground. "I value truth more than a paycheck," he said. "And I won't let a man die when I can stop it." The room fell into tense silence, broken only by the rhythmic beep of Richard's monitor. Finally, Martin let out a cold laugh, brushing past David as he left the suite. But David knew what that laugh meant. He had just made himself a target. Still, he also knew something else. He was closer to the truth than ever before. And he would not stop, not until the poisoner was exposed. The following evening, the hospital was unusually quiet. Rain pattered against the tall glass windows, and thunder rolled in the distance. David knew it was the perfect night to act. He had decided to set a trap, not for strangers, but for Martin Langston himself. When the catering staff delivered Richard's dinner, a bowl of stew, bread, and another glass of juice, David asked the nurse politely if he could remain inside for extra security. She didn't argue. After all, the billionaire's safety was his job. Richard, weak but alert, gave David a curious glance. David leaned close and whispered, "Sir, please, don't touch the food tonight. Just trust me." Richard, too exhausted to question further, nodded faintly. Then David waited. Minutes later, the door opened, and Martin walked in, his usual confident stride filling the room. He greeted his brother with exaggerated warmth, then eyed the untouched tray. "You need to eat, Richard," Martin urged. "You're not going to get better by starving yourself." David watched carefully, pretending to look away. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw it, Martin's hand, slipping quickly toward the glass of juice, dropping something small and dissolvable into the liquid. David's heart pounded. There it was, proof. He waited until Martin turned to Richard again, urging him to drink. Then David stepped forward, his deep voice cutting through the air. "Mr. Langston," he said, addressing Richard, but his eyes locked on Martin, "I think you should let me drink the juice first. For safety." The room froze. Richard frowned weakly. Martin stiffened, his eyes narrowing. "That's unnecessary," Martin said sharply. "The food is perfectly safe." David didn't blink. He reached for the glass, his large hand wrapping around it. "Then you won't mind if I test it?" Martin's face paled, and for the first time his composure cracked. He stammered, then quickly forced a laugh. "This is ridiculous. You're just a guard." But Richard was watching closely now, suspicion dawning in his tired eyes. David set the glass down firmly. "Doctors can't explain your sickness, sir. But I can. Someone is poisoning you, and I believe we both know who." The silence was heavy, broken only by Richard's shallow breathing and the distant thunder outside. Martin's jaw clenched, his mask slipping. For the first time, the billionaire saw the truth in his brother's eyes. The tension in the room was unbearable. Richard Langston's frail body shifted in bed, his tired eyes fixed on his younger brother. Martin's face twitched, caught between denial and rage, while David stood tall, refusing to back down. At last, Richard's voice broke the silence. "Martin, is this true?" Martin's lips curled, his charm gone, his mask shattered. "Do you think I'd waste my life waiting for scraps from you?" he snapped. "All my life, you've been the golden son. The empire, the name, the money, always yours. What about me, Richard? What did I get? Nothing but your shadow. David's stomach clenched as Martin's words spilled out, bitterness dripping like venom. You were never going to step aside, never going to share, Martin continued. So yes, I decided to speed things up. And why not? You're old, sick, clinging to power. Everything could have been mine if you had just... His voice trailed into a hiss. Richard's face turned ashen, not just from weakness, but from betrayal. His own brother, the man he had trusted most, was ready to let him die. That was when David moved. He picked up the poisoned glass of juice, holding it firmly in his hand. His deep voice thundered with authority. This glass can decide everything. If you claim it's safe, then drink it yourself. Martin's eyes widened in panic. He stumbled back, his bravado crumbling. You don't know what you're doing. But Richard had heard enough. Summoning what little strength he had, he pressed the emergency button by his bed. Within moments, nurses and hospital security rushed in. "Arrest him," Richard whispered hoarsely, pointing to his brother. The staff hesitated, shocked, until David stepped forward, explaining everything he had seen, the hand slipping something into the glass, the worsening symptoms after meals, the night Richard skipped the drink and suddenly improved. The evidence was undeniable. Martin lunged for the door, but David's strong arms stopped him cold. With a single move, he pinned the would-be heir until security handcuffed him. As they dragged Martin away, Richard turned his weary eyes toward David. Tears welled, not just from relief, but from gratitude. "You saved my life," Richard whispered. 20 doctors couldn't see it, but you did." David bowed his head humbly. "Sometimes, sir, the eyes of the simple see what the clever overlook." For the first time in weeks, Richard slept peacefully that night, safe, alive, and finally aware that not all heroes wore white coats. Some stood quietly in uniforms, watching with eyes that refused to ignore the truth. And David Okoro, the overlooked guard, became the man who saved a billionaire. Sometimes, the greatest wisdom does not come from wealth, education, or titles. It comes from the humble, the ones who pay attention when others are too busy to look. Richard Langston had all the money in the world, yet it was